of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Love so undeniable, I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable, I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love. Love, love, you're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. To us. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. And it's higher than the mountains that I face, and it's stronger than the power of the grave. And it's constant in the trial and the change. This one thing remains. This one thing remains. Your love gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love, and on and on and on and on it goes. Yes, it overwhelms and satisfies my soul. And I never ever have to be afraid. This one thing remains. Your love never fails and never gives up. It never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up. It never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up. It never runs out on me. Your love, in death, in life, I'm confident and covered by the power of your great love. My debt is paid. There's nothing that can separate my heart from your great love. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. This one thing remains. This one thing remains. Here and now I'm in the fire and above my head.
Here and now I'm in the fire and above my head.
Being held under the pressure, don't know what'll be left.
Being held under the pressure, don't know what'll be left.
But it's here in the ashes.
Right here,
I'm finding treasure.
He's making
Diamonds, diamonds, making diamonds out of dust. He is refining, heaven is timing. He's making diamonds out of us. I'll surrender to the power of being crushed by love.
I'll surrender to the power of being crushed by
Till the
love.
beauty that was hidden isn't covered up.
Till the beauty.
Testing. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Glad all of y'all are here this morning. Glad those that are at home being able to watch us live are here with us as well in spirit. We're going to be in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 9 today. Now, I was so glad for Clay last week. He got the verse in the chat verses that I thought was very difficult to explain. So I am very grateful for him. Last week we discussed the relationship between the husband and the wife. And he went into great detail and made me think of things that I never thought of before with this. And that last part, the relationship should be like Christ in the church. When he spoke of that, it just brought that whole part into new light to me. This week, Paul continues on by talking about children and their parents in the first part, and then something that we're not really involved with anymore in the second of slaves and masters. Now, we only have 9 short verses today. So to try to keep the whole class going, any and all input from y'all is not only greatly welcomed, it is very much appreciated. There may be something that y'all have experienced in y'all's lives that could help somebody that is possibly live streaming with us today. Or there could be somebody else sitting out here who's having issues with other family members that your experience may be able to help them help their family members. So don't be afraid to speak out. I'll try to sum up everything you say. That way the people at home can hear what your input has to be as well. All right, so let's read our verses today. 6, starting in verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in training and instruction in the Lord. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not men, because you know the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Now, I know we have quite a few parents in the room. Some of you are grandparents. Sorry, Mom. Now, let's be honest. We're all family here. Let's be honest with one another. How many of y'all have used this verse to your children at least 100 times during their time of growing up? I would be willing to bet nearly on every single one of y'all. Now, to be honest, in my time as a child, I heard this all the time. If I'm truthful with you, I heard this very same chapter said to me yesterday as I was picking on my mother. Yes, and I said, how ironic that I get to teach that same verse today that you just threw at me, Mom. And she almost didn't believe me. I had to go get the page and the Bible out and say, look, it's right here. This is what I get to teach today. So I get to speak from experience with this one. Now, when Paul is quoting this, where does he pull this from? Honor thy father and mother. Where is that from? 10 Commandments, absolutely. Do y'all remember which commandment it was? All right. Tom's holding up his head, yes. So let's turn back over to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 5 is the 10 Commandments. And we're going to briefly go through the 10 Commandments just to get it fresh in everybody's mind. So he begins with, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Then he goes to the commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them, worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third, the fourth generation of those but showing love to thousands of generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The next one I will summarize because it's quite long, but it is observe the Sabbath by keeping it holy. Then we get to the one he pulled out. Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false testimony about your neighbor. And then finally, do not cover your neighbor's wife. Do not covet. Now in verse 2, it says this is the first commandment with a promise. Now going over the 10 commandments, if that was the first commandment with a promise, as he said, the rest of the commandments really didn't have a promise written in them. Why do you think that is? Does anybody have any idea? Okay. Okay. He said that this is the other commandments are a commandment like law with penalties to them. This commandment we're talking about is if you do this, you will receive this. Okay. Absolutely. Does anybody have anything else? Any other thoughts? Yes. Absolutely. Exactly. Yes, the commandments, I've did a little bit of research on them, and there is 2 different ways that it's broken up. Some say the first 5 and the last 5, some say the 6 and the 4, and it's really interesting. And I do recommend everybody, if you haven't looked into that, spend a little time this week and look and read, and it'll really change. It really changed the way I looked at the 10 Commandments. So it's a very difficult question. I mean, we don't know 100% why. So let me give you an easy question. This one's going to be easy, and I guarantee you every single one of you can answer this one. When did you become children of your parents? Duh. The day you were born, right? I figured, give you an easy one. Second question, when do you stop being children of your parents? Exactly, never. I have a love of the medieval period. Anybody who really knows me and talks to me knows I love medieval times. I love fantasy novels with knights and lords and ladies and dragons and heroes and elves and dwarves, that sort of thing. I can talk your leg off on that. I love it. Kind of jealous that next week is the armor of God talk. You know, I like armor. I have some. But in both of these instances, both fantasy and in the medieval times, they put a very big importance on family. You can go and see this because whenever you got introduced, if you were someone of importance and you were introduced to the king or a knight of the land, When you were introduced, you were known as David, the son of Robert, the son of Howard, the son, and they would spend minutes and minutes telling of their family history. So let's get into the meat of this section. What does it mean to y'all, and how can we honor our fathers and mothers? Examples. How did y'all honor y'all's parents, and how did you hope your kids honored you? Obey. Do nothing to bring dishonor to the family name. Okay. Does anybody else have anything? Respect. Absolutely, respect. Anybody else got? These are some great ones. Does anybody else have some? I have one good example with my grandfather, my dad's dad. When I was growing up, it was always a joke, I thought. He read the Brownwood paper every single day. Every day, like clockwork, that was one of the things he began his day with. I always thought he was joking until closer to the end of his life. He looked through and he goes, well, I didn't see my name in the paper today. Well, it's like, of course, Granddad, you're not going to see your name in the paper. You don't do anything. You're a farmer. You stay out of the paper. You pride yourself in that. Well, he kept on. It's like, okay. Then I got into the youth fair. And, we got into middle school, high school, got into the band, was a drum major for 1 year. And then he started saying, I saw my name in the paper today. Well, man, I tell you, I tore that paper top to bottom, front to back. It's like, Granddad, I didn't see your name in the paper. He goes, yes, you did. He said, that name right there, Bechtold, that's my name. And you have my name. I'm looking to see if my name is in the bad section of the paper. Wasn't this time. I'm glad for that. And it really hit me, especially after reading this. It reminded me of all of that. My granddad's been gone for quite a few years. Still today, I think every time I see a newspaper, Granddad, your name's not in the bad section. So how else can we honor our father and mother even after they're gone? How can you honor your parents after they're gone? You can remember them. Absolutely. How else? You can continue not bringing dishonor upon the family name. I love that one. The things they taught us, the advice they taught us, the ways they taught us, we can apply that to our lives. We can pass that on. Absolutely. Great, great ideas. Now, as I said earlier, parents have been using this verse, both in Deuteronomy and in Ephesians, towards their children, probably since the time it was wrote. Me, usually every other week. Do you think, well, think about it this way. Isn't this something the parents need to direct to themselves? Instead of going, children, honor your father and mother. Children, obey your parents, which is what it says. Don't you think we need to also say this in a mirror? Think of it this way. Do you need to teach your children how to disobey? Okay, let's go with the Bible. Did God teach Adam and Eve how to disobey? Oh, no, absolutely not. But, so parents, it is your job to teach children how to obey. So when you read this verse to your children, your grandchildren, or you hear other parents quote it to theirs, it's a good idea to think about it yourselves. That child is not obeying. Why is it not obeying? Is it being rebellious, as children can be? Absolutely. Or have you taught that child how to honor your parents? Have you taught that child how to obey? Have you set a good example?
I remember a time in our family where my little brother and I were horrible to my mother. And my dad came out and sat with us and he said, "Boys, you will not treat my wife that way." And the way he said it was kind of a shot across our bow. And he was teaching us that idea of respect and honoring.
Absolutely. The Bible is filled with so many instructions for this, to respect your parents, to honor, how to teach your kids respect, honor, obey. Example, my mother, she has a favorite quote. She's told to me when I was a kid. She told it to me when I was a teenager. Luckily, I survived through my teenage years. I didn't think I was for a long time. And she even tells it to me today. It is a proverb, Proverbs 13:24. Does anybody happen to just off the top of their head know what Proverbs 13:24 is? I'll read it, I'll sum it up, and then I'll read the proverb to you. Because this is how my mom said it all the time. Spare the rod, spoil the child. It says, "He who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is careful to discipline him." Now, one of my earlier lessons, I told you, I thought mom loved me more than my brother. She has a favorite story to tell. I bet most of the people in this church has heard this story, and I know she's watching right now and probably turning red, so it's my turn, Mom. I get to tell the story. When I was a little child, probably not more than 3 or 4, I was rambunctious. I couldn't sit still. I had to have something to do, and honestly, back then in church, the singing was good, the preaching was good, but I wanted to do something. Well, I don't know if it was during a song, a prayer, or during one of your sermons, Brother Ted, but I got the notion. I sat right back there on that very back corner of this row. The reason why is because those doors and me had a nice relationship. The gentleman that would open the doors would open them as Mom escorted me back and forth 3 or 4 or 5 times during church to get a lesson taught to me. And they would ask me every day, every Sunday, "David, are we going to make it through church today? We're going to make it through church today?" And eventually I finally got to be honest with them and go, "Nope, probably not." But during this one Sunday, Mom's attention was elsewhere. So I decided that it would be fun to army crawl from that back pew, and I went in between people's legs. Mom has told me many times as you could see heads jerk and nod. And I came to be right here, exactly in this spot, to which I got on my knees on this pew and looked at my mom and said, "Hi, Mom." Mom got up. The look on Mom's face was frightening. She slowly, but as quickly as she could, without drawing attention to herself, came up here to retrieve me. Well, I know, and Mom has said this before, that this whole section and this whole section, you just saw people covering their mouths with their heads bobbing up and down, trying to hold back the laughter. And as she picked me up to go, and the gentleman already had the doors wide open, they knew what was coming, I started screaming, "Help me! help me, help me. So I understand I learned at that time, I will obey my mom and never do that again. So why is obedience so important? Why do y'all is obedience of your children so important?
Can't obey your parents, you can't obey God.
Absolutely. You read my notes, I think. If we do not teach our kids to obey the parents, how can we hope to teach them how to honor, how to obey our Heavenly Father? I mean, it goes hand in hand. We got to teach them to obey us. If we don't teach them to obey us, how can we hope for obey God? How can we hope for them to obey and respect their teachers, their supervisors when they get older? I mean, it's just a snowball effect. Or the law, absolutely. I mean, let's be honest, we're seeing that in today's society. We're seeing it quite often. What promise does God make to each and all of us concerning this? Well, that's right. What's that? A long life. Absolutely. He says it in verse 3, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy a long life on this earth. So does that mean that we're going to be living for 150 years? No, of course not. Yes, you've been talking to my mom, haven't you? If you learn to obey your parents, you might make it to adulthood. I heard that about when I was 13, 15, and 17. I remember those talks very vividly. So, what does this mean to you? That you're given this promise of a long life, a full life. Whenever I read it, and I went back and looked at the 10 Commandments, one of the commandments actually really stood out to me during this. And it was right before Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 8. Whenever he said, "You shall not make yourself an idol in the form of anything of heaven or above. For I am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation that hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations for those that love me and keep my commandments." The reason that one stood out to me is if we teach our children to honor and obey and respect you as a parent, that in turn teaches them to respect God the Father. Now they're going to be inclined to teach their children the same thing. If they can instill that into their children, then now your grandchildren will hopefully be instilled that same principle. Then your great-grandchildren. It is a snowball stairwell type effect. If you keep it up and you keep doing this, you're going to raise generations of children that honor and respect. And another thing that I think of, this long, full life, my granddad is no longer with us, but his name still lives on in me. And because of that, I see my granddad still having a long, full life with me. I am honoring and respecting. Yes, sir.
You also have the idea it will go well with you.
Yes.
We can help our kids avoid all kinds of trouble in this life if we could just teach them to be compliant.
Yes, absolutely. I did hear a sermon, a whole week-long lecture once of these are not laws to punish the people, they're roadblocks. And it's to keep you from danger. I mean, it's not, I'm keeping the good stuff away from you. No, I'm trying to save you from the bad stuff that's over there without you ever having to deal with it. And that's one of those things we can teach our children. Okay, So let's flip the table with verse 4. This is a word we don't use in everyday society anymore. What does it mean to exasperate your children? It's not common. I had to look it up. I've heard it many times, but I didn't know an exact definition. The definition that I found was to intensely irritate and frustrate. The King James Version says, "Do not provoke your children to wrath." Now, like I said, y'all, we've got a lot of parents in the room. Let's be honest. Is there something that y'all know of that would provoke your kids to wrath, as the King James Version says, or exasperate your children? What examples can y'all give that is a way that we can do that to our kids? Absolutely. That is one of the big ones that I always thought of whenever I was doing this. And I had a lot of kids in school I was friends with, and I saw them do this. It was do as I say, not as I do. How is that teaching our kids that that's wrong if we're going to go ahead and do it? There was a video a few weeks ago that Tom shared. Kid drinking. And then, well, Daddy, I see you drinking. How else can we exasperate our kids? It's tough. I mean, there might have been something that your parents done to exasperate you. I won't. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes. No. Absolutely.
One of the things I deal with as a counselor from time to time are, in particularly, dads who make an appointment. They're in a split family, and they make an appointment. I'll be there this Saturday, and the kid sits, and Dad never shows up. If the first 5 commandments have to do with our relationship with God, what are you teaching them about God in that concept? Exactly. Absolutely. It's something that's very difficult because, to me, there is a line. There is a line that we have to watch. We have to teach obedience to our children. We have to discipline our children. It says that in the Bible so many times, it's not even funny. But we also cannot drive our children to wrath. So the do as I say, not as I do, I see that so much. It is. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. He smoked like a chimney at one time, but he sure made sure that me and my brother did not. He was saying it's a double-edged sword. His dad told him, "Look at me. Don't do what I did. Don't start smoking. Look at what it's done to me." Absolutely. Exactly. Children learn what they see. So if you're doing something, how is that child going to learn that it's good or bad? Absolutely. One other thing came to mind whenever I was thinking about this. Is it obedience we're teaching them, or are we leading them to wrath? And I have to go back to, the best teacher that's in the Bible, Jesus. Look at the Sermon on the Mount. If you really delve deep into the Sermon on the Mount, what he's telling them throughout the entire thing to me is that it matters what's in here. What is the true reason why you're doing something? Search your heart.
If you really think and believe, in one way, the thing I get that gets me all the time is you hear people and they will stump their toe or somebody will cut them off in traffic and they will say, oh, and then fill in, instead of a dirty word, they will say another word. Who are we fooling here? God reads the heart. If you have a curse word in your heart towards somebody because they just cut you off in traffic or something, but you don't say that nasty word, didn't you just cuss them out? It matters what's inside, not you can trick people. You can't fool God. So always remember, whenever you're reading stuff like this and whenever you're trying to put it into action, get it right here. If it's right here, everything else starts falling into place. And how do we teach kids how to obey their parents? How to do the right thing? Right here. Everything that we need in life, right here in this book. We just have to study it and look for it. Now we're going to get to a difficult part. Children and parents, that's something we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Now he goes into proper behavior for slaves and masters. Now, whenever he's talking this, let's remember this is the first century. This is 2,000 years ago, give or take. The Romans are in charge. The Greeks are still a powerhouse. The Romans are taking over the world. So let's talk about slaves in the first century. Slaves were nothing more than property. Slaves were the equivalent of that book. Right there. That's all they were. You could do whatever you wanted to a slave. You could punish them. You could beat them. You could brand them. You could take off a limb. You could take their children from their screaming mother's arms and sell those kids. You could kill them without reason. There would be absolutely no punishment, no retribution. It was allowed. It was a horrible, horrible, harsh life for a slave. So thinking of it that way, God calls us, each and every one of us, to be lights in a dark world. He tells us to do things that differently than what most people would. Let's be honest. If you lived in those kind of conditions, wouldn't a human's first instinct would be get back at them, do something, get even? I mean, that's a human's instinct, is to retaliate. But he calls us to be different. Here he says you need to obey those masters with respect and fear and sincerity of heart. He just went right back to the Sermon on the Mount right there. Do everything sincere of heart. And the very next verse is just so powerful. Just as you would obey Christ. So he's just told these slaves, obey your masters as you would obey Jesus Christ. And then not only to obey them when their eye is upon you, whenever they're watching to make sure you're doing everything right, do everything right whenever they're not even in the house looking at you. I really, really like the next phrase that he puts. But like slaves of Christ. So he's telling them, you're slaves of your master, but also be slaves of Christ. Do this like you are slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. There is a difference between a slave and a servant during these times. As I said, the slave's life was absolutely horrible. Just can't imagine it. But a servant was usually working to pay off a debt. You couldn't pay, you borrowed money, you couldn't pay it back, well, you had to work it off. And if your master was really horrible to you and did bad things, you could get a new master. As Christians, I believe we need to strive to be slaves of Christ, just like it says right here. Because back just a few weeks ago, we read in Ephesians 2, 8 through 9, for by the grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not of your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no man may boast. We also sing a song, not near often enough, because it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. I still remember it from my kid. He paid a debt he did not owe. I owed a debt I could not pay. We can never do enough to repay what was given to us. Nothing we can do. So to think of us as a servant, to me, means that eventually I can repay what I need. But I like to think of myself as a slave to Christ. Our lives are no longer our own. We live for Christ, for God. And Christ can use us, our lives, for his glory, for the glory of God. Matthew 11, 28 through 30 really ties in great with this. Come to me, all you are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So live your life knowing that your life is now God's. You live that way, and God takes care of us. He just said his burden is light. He is there for us through thick and thin. Now he flips that around to how masters are to treat their slaves. How are they supposed to treat the slaves? In the exact same way, as equals. God shows no favoritism. Just right there, we read that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is slave or free. Isn't it safe to say then, if God rewards you for every good you do, that God will also discipline and punish for every evil, whether you're slave or free? God shows no favoritism. Now, one thing like I said, I like the medieval times. I like the Roman era. One thing that really intrigues me about this, thinking that God calls us to do things differently, in Greek times, what did everybody strive to be? What job was successful in Greek times? Does anybody know what would a successful Greek would be? A successful Greek is a scholar. They prided themselves on getting to a job where they got paid to sit down and talk all day and not do a single ounce of manual labor. That was highfalutin in Greek society. They wanted to just talk and throw their ideas out, and labor was beneath them. But Paul right here says, masters, you need to do just as your slaves. You need to work. So I just thought that was funny, was how he's calling the slaves to do something out of their norm. He's also calling the masters to do stuff out of their norm. You read my notes too, didn't you? So we got just a few minutes left. Let's go into some applications. So let's start with the second part, since it is the most foreign to us nowadays. How can we apply this section to our lives today? So instead of the whole slave-master relationship, what if you go in there and you think about it as a boss and a worker? Think of it that way. Instead of being the master, you're now the boss. Or if you're not the boss, you're the worker. How does that relate? Another way I thought of it, and this one hits kind of home to me because I worked in retail for 20 years. Think of it as the shopper and that clerk that's working for the store. Okay. The other example I have is teacher and student. It fits really well if you just, think of it in terms today that we can apply this to our lives today, which is why it's so important. We need to look at this Bible going, okay, how can we use this today? Because it's still here 2,000 years later for a reason. Now, a little discussion on the first part of the section. The children obey your parents. Okay, let's say your kids are already grown and out of the house. How can you use this info today? Don't have kids? How can you turn this to help people today? And I'll leave on this one thing, something I've thought of. There used to be a video on Facebook where parents would ask their kids, hey, what age do you think mommy and daddy is? Where do you think mommy and daddy work? And the little kids would give the wildest, craziest answers, and it is absolutely adorable. We did it to my nephew, Beckett, and it's just the cutest thing ever. But that got me thinking, parents, grandparents, why don't you have a sit-down serious discussion with your kids, your grandkids, and go, hey, being serious, let's get away from the play. What is most important to mommy and daddy? And get their honest answer. If their honest answer is not, Christ, God, if their honest answer is not obeying and respecting my parent, what do your kids see about you? I guarantee you, it may change your life. Because if your kids come up and tell you, or your grandkids say, well, the most important thing to you is going golfing, or, hey, I got to go to the bar, it could be the slap in the face. But sometimes it's called tough love. If you need that tough love, I've had a friend do it, and her life has completely did a flip-flop. I appreciate y'all's time and attention and all of your input. I really do. We'll see you next week. I believe Aaron will finish up the book for us.